The Tree on Sunshine Lane. Sunshine Lane, just past Cardiff Bridge, is not a place respectable people linger. And it was not a place Jim Bradley ever pictured himself living. He had just fallen into it, and he had been respectable, once. In fact, he was still respectable, if you asked his feathered companions, and possibly Ed from the petrol station. The Crows, Maybelle, Shauna, Clippy, and Pirate were excellent company, so he always shared his food with them, and in turn they brought him gifts. They gave him an engagement ring, but he hadn't felt right about that, and walked 40 minutes to the police station to turn it in. The birds took care of him, and he wondered what he could get them for Christmas on his way back in the dark. Perhaps he should make them a feast. How would they feel about potatoes or chocolate pudding, and would eating a roasted chicken hurt their conscience? It was unlikely he could get any of those things, as the last meal he'd eaten had been a leftover Big Mac someone threw at him. He had only lived on Sunshine for 8 months, but the taste of roasted potatoes felt ethereal to him. It was easier when he had his car, but that was towed 2 months ago, and he could not afford to get it back. Janice, who hoped to never see his stupid face again, used to make an excellent Christmas dinner. He wondered if she would cook anything special this year, in the home they used to share, and hoped she was doing well. Nothing had been the same since Mallory died. He took out the picture of the 3 of them from his coat pocket and showed it to Maybelle. Cirrhosis of the liver. She was 34, but that didn't make it any easier. He stroked the bird's feathers and put the photo back in his pocket. Maybelle was his favorite, though he tried not to show it. She was the oldest crow and had a few missing feathers, but she was beautiful. I always told Janice we needed 2 kids, for a backup. He laughed at the sadistic joke he used to tell when they were young, and his throat tightened. There was no sense in crying about it, but a few tears fell out anyway. A Christmas tree, that's what I'll get them, he thought, as he made his way to his spot under the bridge. Images of young Mallory, with colors from the tree lights in her golden curls, floated in his mind, and he smiled. Yes, the crows would be happy to have something so pretty. Maybelle settled into the spot above his shoulder and fell asleep with him, like his own guardian angel. Something shoved him awake, and Maybelle disappeared in a blur. "You're not welcome here no more," said a voice, and Mr. Bradley opened his eyes to see it was morning. "There's plenty of room," Jim said, and looked at the man who had spoken. Rick had 2 teeth and looked almost 80, though he was only 56. Dental hygiene was one of the few habits Mr. Bradley had kept from his respectable days. He couldn't stand the feeling of dirty teeth, even if toothpaste and brushes were expensive. His beard and hair, however, had been long neglected. "No, you're gonna get them birds to steal from us. None of us trust you." Rick scowled at him, and Jim looked at the other bridge dwellers' faces. All of them looked down, even Sarah, who had never been anything but nice. "I wouldn't steal from any of you, and if the crows did, I would give it back," said Jim, but the others shook their heads. "Nah, they're stinking it up with their poop. Find another bridge," Rick said, as he took a swig of his whiskey. Jim met the eyes of the others, and no one negated Rick, so he rolled up his sleeping mat. He looked up and saw the birds looking down at him from the top of the bridge and threw the sunflower seeds he had in his pockets to them. "Guess I need a new place to sleep," he said. He usually spent his time on Sunshine, with his sign that read, "Hungry, please help." But he didn't have time for that. Christmas was only a week away. The marquee at the middle school said so, and his friends deserved a good Christmas. The day was cold, and he searched for any trees he could find with 5 pounds. He walked to the supermarket and found nothing he could afford. Then around the neighborhoods looking for garage sales, where he was asked to leave a few times, and then to the corner stores. The thing that surprised him most about his life on the street was how long everything took. When he had a car, he could get his errands done within a few hours. Now everything took ages. He was a long way from his street when the sky darkened. Then he saw the pound store. and it occurred to him that birds are small, and a toy Christmas tree was all they really needed. So he went inside and found a mini evergreen decoration. He hugged it to his chest and found tiny ornaments to put on it and a bag of nuts. He even had enough money to buy himself a can of soup. The day could not have gone better. He trekked back to his stop and set the tiny tree up for the crows on the sidewalk and sprinkled the nuts under it. Then he slept on the grassy patch of earth beside it. He missed the bridge and the community. The patch didn't feel safe. A drunk driver could easily run over him in the grass, and the birds wouldn't be able to alert him in time. In the morning, the birds cawed happily and pecked away at their treats. Jim smiled and then noticed a plastic package near the tree. A razor? He opened it and wondered if the crows were trying to tell him something. "Thank you, but I can't shave. I don't have any soap or money to buy any." 2 hours later, a small bar of soap landed in his lap. He looked up at Pirate, who dropped it, and wondered if he had gotten accidental exposure to LSD. That would have made more sense than what he was seeing. Jim made his way to the petrol station anyway, and asked Ed if he could borrow some scissors. Ed eyed him for a few moments before handing them to him. Then Jim took them to the bathroom and carefully cut off chunks of his hair and beard over the trash can. He soaped up his face and reached to shave his beard, but the razor shook in his hand. Why had he let things get so bad? He could have found another job, but when they let him go, he didn't even try. He just stayed in his car. It felt easier than facing his wife. No, that wasn't it. He couldn't face her. When they lost Mallory, he shut down, and Janice yelled. Then the firm merged, and he didn't have the energy to do anything else. He had always planned to come back and tell her the next week. For 20 weeks he told himself that. Then the money ran out, and he knew he couldn't tell her after that. Jim Browley looked at the shaggy person in the mirror and shaved his face. When he was finished, he almost didn't look like the person he remembered. He hoped his friends would recognize him. Ed smiled at him as he came out of the bathroom. "Good for you. If you want a shower, you should try the truck station down the road. I'll give you a ride if you want." "I'll give it a shot," said Mr. Browley as he walked out. Ed followed him and handed him money for the shower, which he refused, but it was almost Christmas, and it did sound nice. So he thanked the kind man and headed for the station. Maybelle landed on his shoulder. He patted her gently, thankful she knew who he was. Jim stepped into the hot water, clothes and all. He hadn't realized how good it felt to be clean, or that he had even missed it. When the time ran out, there was no avoiding making puddles on the floor, but he tried his best and left feeling better than he had in ages. The wet clothes would be cold, but it was worth it to be clean. Jim went back to his spot on the street and went to sleep that night on the unforgiving grass. He took out his picture again and drifted to sleep as he told the birds stories. He dreamed of being in an ice storm, and then of wrecking at sea. The night was cruel, and each time he stirred during his sleep, he wondered if the shower was worth it. When the sun rose, Jim woke up feeling like someone had hit his head, and his mouth felt drier than usual. He shivered and looked down at his hand. His picture was gone. He frantically felt around in his pockets, but they were empty. The birds were gone too. Jim began to wonder if the crows were a figment of his imagination all along. What if he was insane and he never had a family? He didn't like that thought and shook his head. He took out his cardboard help sign and waited for the birds to come back. 2 people stopped by. One gave him a bottle of water, which he drank happily, and another gave him a sandwich and a few pounds. A while later, Maybelle came back with his photo. "Why did you take it? You shouldn't have done that," he said, snatching it from her claws. She tilted her head sideways, looking at him, and he patted her. "Don't do it again, okay?" he said gently. Then she flew away, presumably to where the other crows were. The freezing clothes clung to his body, and he had thought about going nude. But of course that would put him in jail. Then again, maybe that was a good thing. In jail, at least, he'd have a warm space and warm clothes. He missed his friends, both feathered and human. Bob had never seemed like much of a friend, but waiting alone for hours put things into perspective. So Jim waited for his birds and mulled over how to get his spot under the bridge back. Maybe he could strike up a deal for them to share the things the crows gave him. In the distance, he saw his friends chasing someone. They were good birds, not nuisances. He wondered what horrible thing the person must have done. As Maybelle and the gang grew closer, he realized they were chasing a woman, a pretty woman, with silvered brown hair and a green coat. His heart fell. She waved her hands around frantically, screaming. When she was a few feet away, the crows flew off and she dusted her jacket. "Jim," the woman said, blinking her eyes in disbelief. Jim stared at Janice. He braced for her to slap him or yell at him. "Jim, I thought you were dead." She walked to embrace him with tears in her eyes. He hugged her back, confused. "I thought you hated me." "I did, but I love you more. I thought you knew I didn't mean it," she said. His shoulders fell. "I'm sorry." "Come home," she said gently. He walked with her down the familiar streets, and she asked why he was wet. "Got into a bit of rain," he said, and she looked at him with doubt. "Where have you been?" "Sunshine Lane." "Oh, lots of homeless people there. I hope you weren't hurt." He looked at her, and her face fell in understanding. How long had it taken Maybelle to find Janice? Is that why she took my picture? How had she communicated to the others? Jim smiled at the thought, and thanked the birds internally. "How far did they chase you?" he asked. "From the pound shop. A friend told me the one near Cardiff was better, and it was." Her voice cracked at the last part. It took them a few minutes to reach Janice's car, and he got in the passenger side. It was weird how familiar and strange the car felt. They didn't speak much in the car. He was in a bit of shock, and he was sure she felt the same. When they pulled in the front of the driveway, he smiled and told Janice his eyes itched as he wiped them dry. The 100-year-old brick house had never looked so beautiful. The inside looked almost exactly the same, though the TV had gotten a bit bigger, and yarn was strewn about with either crochet or knitting needles. She must have taken it up after he left. He sat in his favorite chair in the living room and chuckled. Then he rose and walked to their bedroom closet. All of his clothes were still hanging there. Janice's footsteps creaked behind him. He turned to wrap his arms around her, and they held each other for a long time. Jim strung lights around the house the next day with help from his feathered friends. On Christmas Day, Pirate, Maybelle, Clippy, and Shauna showed up at the dinner table, and Janice was surprised, but she made them all plates. Jim loved her more for it. They discovered that crows do, in fact, love roasted chicken and potatoes and even Christmas pudding. Jim walked to the fireplace in the middle of dinner, took out the photo from his pocket and kissed it. "Happy Christmas, Mallory." He set it beside the other memories on the mantel, then found his camera and snapped a picture of his friends with Janice in the dining room. Soon he found a job, and life settled into a new normal, with his friends only visiting on holidays. He went to Sunset Lane often to teach people how to befriend the birds and bring them food. Eventually, Maybelle's wings grew weak, and she decided to live with them. Mr. Browley's other friends stopped visiting as often, but every year, the Browleys received something small on their doorstep for Christmas, and every year he left seeds and a bit of pudding to thank them.